Hello everyone, my name is Angel Paula Capitan. My student ID is 231041233.
My name is Farisa Amelia Ziza with number identity 23104120009.
Today we would like to discuss one of the most debated issues in identity and cultural politics entitled The Shift Toward Post-Multiculturalism is merely an intellectual justification for the state to tighten border controls and discriminate against certain identity groups. At first glance, post-multiculturalism seems like a positive idea because it promotes integration, shared values, and social cohesion. This concept sounds reasonable, and many governments argue that they are necessary to maintain national unity. However, the real question is, are these policies truly promoting integration, or are they simply truly providing a new justification for discrimination against minority groups? In this presentation, we will explain why people scholars believe that post-multiculturalism has gradually shifted from promoting diversity to legitimizing unequal treatment towards certain identity groups.
So, to understand this debate, we first need to look at its historical background. After the Second World War, many European countries adopted multiculturalism as a public policy. The main goal was to recognize cultural diversity and allow different ethnic, religious, and cultural communities to preserve their identity while living together peacefully. However, beginning in the early 2000s, Europe experienced increased migration, terrorist attacks, and growing concern about national security. These events led many political leaders to argue that multiculturalism had failed. Because why? Because immigrants were considered unable to fully integrate into society. Yeah, as a result, the idea of post-multiculturalism emerged. Instead of focusing on cultural recognition, government began emphasizing integration, national identity, and their value.
In our opinion, the problem does not lie in the idea of integration itself. Every country certainly has the right to protect its borders and maintain national security. However, many scholars argue that the concept of integration has gradually shifted into assimilation. Instead of encouraging diversity, minority groups are expected to adapt to the dominant culture, while the majority is not expected to make similar adjustments. According to Tamar Dewal, the narrative that multiculturalism has failed is often used as an intellectual framework to justify stricter policies toward minority communities. In other words, discrimination no longer appears in explicit forms. Instead, it is presented through policies that sound objective, rational, and necessary.
Okay, so in our opinion, the issue is not that governments strange border control or even encourage integration. Because why? Because every sovereign state has a legitimate right to protect its territory, regulate migration, and maintain national security. However, these policies become problematic when they are constantly directed toward the same identity groups. When terms such as integration, shared value, and social cohesion are repeatedly used to justify stricter measures that disproportionately affect a Muslim community, refugee, African migrant, and other minorities, they can no longer be viewed as a completely neutral. Because this is why me and Angel, we agree with the motion because we believe that post-multiculturalism has shifted from being a framework for managing diversity into an intellectual justification for policies that normalize exclusion. Rather than encouraging equal participation, it often places the burden of adoption solely in minority communities while leaving the dominant cultural unquestioned.
To conclude, we believe that post-multiculturalism is not inherently wrong. Promoting integration and maintaining national security are legitimate responsibilities of every state. However, integration should never become a justification for unequal treatment. When policies consistently disadvantage particular identity groups while being presented as neutral, they risk turning inclusion to exclusion.
Yeah, therefore, we agree that the shift toward post-multiculturalism has, because in many cases, became an intellectual justification for tightening border controls and discriminating against certain identity groups. True social cohesion should be built through equality, mutual respect, and inclusive policies, not by asking minority alone to change. Thank you.